Hey YouTube, hey guys, hey girls, thanks for stopping by. Check this out, what you see here. That's a WPL-style truck, a JJRC Q65 Willys Jeep with a central metal transfer case, a 370 motor, a good ESC, a Hobby Wing 1080, and the metal drive shafts. It's running on 3S right now, and the axles and tires are stock, so nothing's changed. In this video I want to show you 4 different types of 370 gear motors I bought from Banggood and test them and see how they perform. I will test on 3 and 2S batteries, and I will shortly introduce you into the modifications that are necessary to mount the 370 gear motor in front, as I did here. If you compare this to the stock 130 motor of the Willys Jeep, that's far too weak. That's we would call it in German night and day difference. And I'm absolutely happy with this central gearbox, how smooth it runs, about the quality. So that's my test setup. Actually I'm modifying my Willys Jeep. I intend and will use the stock body. Every part will fit. There are only very slight modifications are necessary. Of course there will be a lot of wire management later on. Those 2 small plastic buckets are perfectly capable of holding an ESC. I use my FlySky GT3C 8-channel transmitter and a small 3-channel receiver, and that's a Hobby Wing 1080, quick run 1080 ESC, a crawler ESC. That's a total overkill, but it's a fantastic ESC. Mounting the metal central transmission is not really a problem. It fits perfectly and works perfectly. It comes with a longer shaft, so you will have to use this longer shaft to connect the drive shafts and the axles to the central transmission. It works so far very well. I don't really like this part hanging free. I would like to have another cross member with a ball bearing, but so far it really works perfectly smooth and calm. I made a custom motor mount for the 370 gearbox motors I ordered from Banggood. It's not that difficult. The most difficult part in this modification is the mounting of the servo. You can't use the original servo in the original servo position anymore. Anyway, you will not use the servo coming with the Willys Jeep. It's a 5-wire servo. If you want to use the JX Servo 1181 MG, which is a perfect replacement for the stock servo, you won't be able to put it in place as the original servo has been. So you will have to search for a different mounting position. You can also use the 1171 MG. This servo is a little bit larger than the original and the 1181 MG, but it's not so important here because you won't be able to use the original servo position anyway. So I mounted a servo upwards, and that's what's the most elaborate part of this modification. To make a good servo mount, I used some metal parts, metal rectangles, and made a good servo mount. But so far I did not use the 1181 or 1171 MG, the big servos. I used one of those tiny Savox SH 0261 metal gears. Those are small helicopters wash plate servos. Quite a little bit of torque, 2.5 kilograms. They are only little less powerful than the PTI 1181 MGs. But if the Savox servo will not be strong enough, so far I do not have any problems, it works fantastic, I will mount the 1181 MG or the 1171 MG servo. They are a little bit higher, so in this area you will have to cut the battery compartment to have to make an opening for the servo. There's still more than enough room for a large battery to be used. So far I'm happy with the small Savox servos, but I have them here and I didn't use them in my helicopters, so they are in my spare box. I would not recommend to buy those servos. They are much more expensive than the JX servos or all those cheap servos we use here. For connecting the gear motor to the central transmission gear, you will have to make your own axles, and you will need 2 cardan joints for this. I used a 3mm steel rod as axle here, so I will need 1 cardan joint with 4mm opening on the gearbox side, because the axle, the spindle, has 4mm diameter, and a 3mm for my center shaft, and then I will need a further cardan joint with 3mm for the shaft and 3mm for the central gearbox. The central gearbox shafts also have a diameter of 3mm. That's easy to make. I'm not sure yet. Probably I will run my Willys Jeep on 3S. I intend to run it on 3S, maybe also on 2S. I do have quite a lot of small 800 to 1000 milliampere 3S batteries for my Oxy 2 helicopters. I did already make quite a lot of tests and everything will fit. So the body will fit and the hood will fit, and I'm quite happy about this, so I do not have to find a place for the batteries. The whole body will fit. After my modifications, of course, I will have to make a good wire management. The on-off switch will not stay in this place, and the only thing you will have to modify a little bit is the floor of the cockpit. You will have to cut on this side. So I'm quite happy. It will be quite easy to use the original Willys Jeep body without a lot of modifications. I intend to paint it, and I intend to use driver figures, maybe a moving steering wheel. Of course I will put lights in it. So if I have finished my Willys Jeep, what will take still some time, I will post a video. But the purpose of this video is to test different 370 gear motors in this setup. It's quite difficult to buy such a motor. It's not difficult to buy a motor, but to know which motor to buy. Banggood offers quite a lot of gear motors, 370 gear motors, and I did not know what to buy. They have those gear motors in 6 and 12 volt for WPL trucks, and they are made by GHI. The name of the company is GHI, but the name of the company is not named in the description. And I ordered 2 of the 12 volt version and 1 of the 6 volt version. And I ordered this motor. It's called GHI GM25 motor, 2000 RPM, 12 volt. And this motor and the 2 motors named GM25, but without the name of GHI in the description of Banggood, they look exactly the same, only the label is a little bit different. And then I ordered a further motor that is called 1000 RPM 12 volt motor. That's this one. It looks different. All the motors do come without wires and plugs, so I soldered those wires and 3.5mm plugs to the motors. You will only get the motor with the gearbox. And what will I do? I will test those motors in this setup on 2 and 3S, and I did already test them. I did measure the rounds per minute in a test setup where I put a little propeller of a small airplane on the motors and used my rounds per minute meter I have for my helicopters, and that way measured the rounds that it make in typical 2 and 3S setups. For changing the voltage to measure the rounds per minute, I used my small lab power supply. I can change the voltage continuously, and I tested the motors as already mentioned in typical 2 and 3S setups on 7.4, 0.6, 8 and 8.4 volts for 2S, and on 11.1, 11.4, 12 and 12.6 volts for 3S setup. On this table here you can see the results. First line shows the results of the GM25 6 volt motor, and I did test it only in the 2S setup, not in the 3S setup. The second line is the 12 volt version of this GM25 Banggood motor. The third line shows the results of the motor named G-High GM25, so these are the three motors that look exactly or nearly exactly the same, and the fourth line shows the results of the 1000 RPM 12 volt Gearmotor. And if you compare the results of the three blue G-High motors, no matter if 6 or 12 volts, you will see that the results do not differ in more than 10%, so it could be that those motors are exactly the same. Of course, my method of measurement with the rounds per minute, the tachometer for the helicopter, is not absolutely exact, and I doubt those are different motors. Very strange that the 12 volt version of the GM25 motor sold as Gearmotor for WPL shows always the lowest rounds per minute result, and the 6 volt version shows a higher rounds per minute at the same voltage, and the 12 volt 2000 RPM GM25 G-High motor shows a little bit higher results. But anyway, there are only about 10% difference in all voltages, so those could be the same motors, and I also will test the 6 volt version on 3S when I do the tests with the chassis. And the 1000 RPM 12 volt motor shows really lower rounds per minute, so it's significantly lower results. We will see how this motor performs in the car. I didn't test it so far. Probably the motor will be very slow, or the car will be very slow, but with a lot of torque. We will see. For testing the motors, I wanted to let the car climb a steep step with the different motors, and using 2 and 3S batteries for this, and also using different types of tires. I used the Willys Jeep JJRC Q65 tires. If you've seen my tire test, those are not so good in performance but look quite good. And I used the soft type of the WPL tires. And I wanted to make a high-speed test, but with changing all the motors all the time, it's impossible to do this outside. I don't have a speed meter or a tachometer anyway, so I made only short full power forward runs in my living room, where you can see how fast the car runs with the different types of motors and the different tires. And what I also did want to do, I wanted to measure the force the motors have, the pull force, and I thought how to do this, and finally I had the idea to use a simple, it's a luggage scale, and used the rims of the MN90 and put a rope inside and mounted the rims to the car and checked how much pull force they have with the different motors on 2 and on 3S. This worked quite nicely. For sure it's not very exact, but anyway, that's for sure good for an estimation of the pull force of the 4 different motor types.
1.5 kilogram.
So now let's see the result of the pull test, the drag force, pull force test. On this table you see in the first column the 4 different motors I used: the GM25 6-volt version, the GM25 12-volt version, the G-High GM25 called 2000 RPM 12-volt, and in the last line the 1000 RPM 12-volt motor. In the center columns you see the results with the 2S battery, and in the right columns the results with the 3S battery. And for those who do not use kilograms, I also present the results in pounds and ounces. You see that the GM25 6-volt on 2S can pull 1.2 kilograms, and the two 12-volt versions, the G-High and the GM25, 1.5 kilograms, so they are a little bit stronger. On 2S, the 12-volt motor 1000 RPM worked and pulled 1.3 kilograms. And on 3S, the 6-volt version pulled 1.7 kilograms, and the two 12-volt versions of the G-High motors 2.2 or 2.1 kilograms, so probably the same. And the last motor, the 1000 RPM 12-volt motor, in the first trial it pulled also more than 2 kilograms probably, but then it fell down and only pulled 1 or 1.5 kilogram on the maximum, and it didn't work really well anymore. So it's a bad motor. You will see it in the running tests after this. I don't know if it broke or if it's bad. Anyway, I couldn't get any consistent results. After the first try with more than 2 kilograms, it only pulled 1 kilogram or 1.2, 1.3, whatever. I can't recommend this motor anyway. And now let's see how those 4 motors perform climbing a steep step. I will test them first on 2S and then on 3S, and with 2 different types of tires, the Willys Jeep tires and the soft WPL tires. You see the GM25, the 6-volt version with a 2S battery and Willys Jeep tires. It climbs quite nicely, very well, and it's a very good low speed control, and it climbs even better with the WPL soft tires. Those tires are fantastic. So on 2S, this GM25 6-volt motor, it's really good. I can absolutely recommend it. The 12-volt motor of the GM25 12-volt version on 2S, it's about the same. It is slightly more powerful than the 6-volt version, and nothing to complain about. Very good. Always better with the soft WPL tires than with the Willys Jeep tires. And the G-High 2000 RPM GM25 12-volt motor, I didn't find really a difference to the GM25 12-volt motor I showed you before. I guess those are the same motors. Fantastic results with the WPL soft tires. They are really crawlers. And those two 12-volt motor versions, they show a little bit more power or force when climbing this steep step than the 6-volt version. And the 1000 RPM 12-volt motor on 2S, it's a catastrophe. It's extremely weak, and it isn't able to go backwards this small step. I set the Hobbywing 1080 to 50% for backwards, and it can't go backwards, and you see it hardly can climb the step. This motor is no good at all on 2S, and even with the soft WPL tires, weak. See, it can't climb the step or hardly can climb it, so probably not much better than the 130 motor coming with the Willys Jeep. And now let's check on 3S. The GM25 6-volt motor did very well, very well, but it went a little bit hot, it ran a little bit hot, so I don't really recommend to run it on 3S. It's not thought for this. But anyway, the results are very good. Even better than on 2S, more powerful, very good low speed control. And with the WPL soft tires, it's a crawler. And the 12-volt version on 3S, it's fantastic. With the Willys Jeep tires. Smooth and slow. And also with the WPL soft tires, even better. So on 3S with the WPL soft tires, this GM25 12-volt motor, it's a real crawler, a small tiny crawler. Is it really? Those tires are fantastic. And the G-High 2000 RPM GM25 12-volt motor, it shows the same results as the GM25 12-volt I showed you before. As already mentioned, I guess those are the same motors. The results are fantastic. Even with the quite poor performing Willys Jeep tires, the performance is okay, or really good for such a small crawler. And with the WPL soft tires, on 3S, fantastic, but it's also fantastic on 2S, so you do not necessarily need to run it on 3S. And the 1000 RPM 12-volt motor on 3S, it's a little bit better than on 2S, but still extreme poor performance. You see with the 50% back settings for reverse on the 1080 Hobbywing ESC, it's not able to climb backwards. And the performance with the soft WPL tires, it's a little bit better, but it's still too weak to climb backwards. So this motor is total crap. It can't climb the step, or hardly can climb it. Really poor. Speed is really good with all three GM25 motors on 2 and on 3S. Of course, the high speed is a little bit higher with the larger Willys Jeep tires than it is with the smaller WPL soft tires. The 1000 RPM motor failed in 2S and in 3S. The other motors have a really good speed on 2S, significantly higher than the stock cars, and on 3S the speed is really very high, nearly too fast for indoors, and you can make wheelies front and backwards, what I do not recommend if you use all the plastic gear that comes with those cars. Anyway, 3S speed like hell, 2S speed significantly faster than in stock, and the 1000 RPM motor forget. So guys, I hope you found those tests interesting and they will help you to choose the right 370 motor for your WPL or JJRC truck. What are my final conclusions? First, I love this metal central transfer case. It's really fantastic, it works fantastic, and the advantage of this case compared to those transfer cases which have the motor directly on the case is that you get better ground clearance. It's lower than the transfer cases with the motor direct bolt on. And to the motors, you saw it. There are three really good motors. Those are all G-height GM25 motors, and there is one crappy motor, this 1000 RPM 12 volt motor, forget it, absolute crap. And the three GM25 motors, fantastic. The 6 volt version of the GM25 maybe shows a little bit lower torque, and it's not recommended to use it on 12 volt, it gets warmer than the others. And the two 12 volt versions, I guess those motors are the same. So if you want to run on 2S, choose any motor you want. I would choose one of the 12 volt versions for 2S too. And if you want to run 3S, choose one of the 12 volt versions. The price is about the same. Check which one's cheaper actually and buy this one. Highly recommend all of those three motors. The Hobbywing 1080 crawler ESC in my test setup, of course, is a total overkill, but this ESC works fantastically. Anyway, I plan to test different ESCs. The small 10 amp or 20 amp ESCs I use a lot in my small cars, and maybe also the much cheaper Hobbywing 1060, the Hobby King X45A crawler ESC, maybe the Hobbywing 1625. We'll see. Probably I will make a video testing 5, 6, 7 different ESCs. Running on 3S, running on 2S. You have to choose. On 3S the car is really fast. Torque is fantastic. Low speed control is fantastic. 2S the car is still fast enough, much faster than stock. And torque is also fantastic. Low end control is fantastic too. So do as you like. The weakest point in the car with these torquey setups are for sure the leaf springs. My leaf springs were flat and always slipped out when I was jumping or going fast and then make a fast stop. I could fix this by simply turning or bending the end of the leaf springs to make a U shape, but now I have the problem, the mounts of the leaf springs slip out easily. There are two different types of mounts, one with a kind of U shape, they are fixed well, and then the other ones with this U shape in straight direction, up down direction, and they always slip out. It could be easily fixed if there would be a hole and not an U-shaped opening, but anyway, that's not the fact. There are upgrade leaf springs in metal available for the WPL trucks. I ordered a set, but the ride height will be higher with those if you use the whole setup. I do not really know if I want this, but anyway, the mounts, they have holes and do not have this U-shaped opening for mounting, so they will for sure work better than those plastic ones. Another weak point, if you use those torquey setups and do a lot of wheelies, are the cross members, the end of the axles, the steering axle, those kind of dog bones, and you shouldn't do a lot of front wheelies, because the end will break. I would like to upgrade this, of course, to metal, as I did, for example, here in my MN90 T90. This metal setup works fantastically, and I did already order another set, but there's one problem in the Willys Jeep and in the JJRC. It's you can't buy those ends, those dog bones separately. You always have to buy a set. One problem with those metal ends or metal dog bones is that all those sets are made for WPL trucks, and the pumpkins and the gears of the JJRC trucks in the Willys Jeep, but also in the other types, is significantly larger than the pumpkin and the gears in the WPL trucks. So see here, original WPL axle for comparison. And so you always have to buy the set, but you cannot use the gears in your JJRC Willys Jeep. That's really a pity. You also cannot use those fantastic metal axle housings. I love them, they are beautiful. So there are two ways, either to change the whole setup to WPL sized gears and pumpkins and axle housings, or still to use the large plastic gears in the JJRC trucks. They are stronger than the WPL gears, and only use the end parts for the axles, the metal end parts for your car. Anyway, I would highly prefer to be able all those end parts for the axles separately. Actually, you can only buy sets for the wider axles of the MN90 and the shorter axles of the normal WPL trucks, and they are not that cheap. In my experience, I so far ordered 2 sets. The quality is very, very good, so I did not have any problems, as many people or some people reported problems. Mine were very well made and work fine. So I will probably only use the metal end pieces. I will probably only use the metal parts, so those tire mounts for the rear axles and the parts, the metal parts for the front axle for steering, and so it's not that cheap that way anyway. What else to say? Nothing else to say. I will check the leaf springs, the upgrade set, and see how the ride height will be after mounting the whole set. Otherwise I will probably only use the mounts, or I will try to fix this in any way. And you should not forget this: if you run on 3 gears with those strong motors, the cars are really, really strong and the motors are torquey, so you probably will have to upgrade to metal parts. So absolutely happy how this car turned out so far. I will choose one of those 3 types of GM GHI motors for my cars. I won't use the 1000 RPM motor. Maybe I will try to mount a brushless motor to the gearbox of this 1000 RPM motor. Now I will finish my Willys Jeep, so paint the body, use driver figures, probably make a moving steering wheel, Laneboy's RC light controller, totally lit it up, and then I will post a video of my final Willys Jeep. Probably will take some weeks. So that's it. Hope you liked it. Hope you got some ideas how to modify your WPL or JJRC or MN models trucks. And thanks for watching. See you in the next video.